Welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. A good morning and a good afternoon to everyone. This is the New Media Best Practices Google Analytics webinar, and my name is Lisa Peterson. I'm a new media education specialist with the California Pacific Public Health Training Center at UC Berkeley School of Public Health, and we're very happy to sponsor this webinar with the Center for Health Leadership. And this is the third session in our latest new media training series, whose theme is all about honing in and finding out if what we're doing is having the impact we intend, learning how best to measure what we do, build upon what's working, stop doing what isn't, and best of all, to learn from guest presenters like we have today, some best practices for how to build a social media presence that matters. And today we're going to delve into Google Analytics, and this is really going to help us to do just that. I'll be your moderator today to help facilitate the discussion. And before we dive in, just a couple of reminders. Please be sure, everyone, to mute your phones by pressing *6. And also know that we're going to be recording both the webinar's audio and chat features. So if you don't want to be recorded, please refrain from talking or using the chat feature. So today we're going to be hearing from Matt Schulte, who's the Vice President of Digital Strategy at Metropolitan Group, and also Alex Bernadi, who's the Digital Content Manager at San Francisco AIDS Foundation, and I'll be your moderator. A little bit about our agenda today. We will review the session objectives, do a little bit more about housekeeping, and we will launch into our first presentation with Matt. We'll follow that with a bit of time for question and answer, and then launch into our second presentation with Alex and follow up with a wrap-up and some key takeaways and resources and reminders for what's next in the series. Our objectives for today is really to kind of start out with a broad introduction and overview about Google Analytics. What is it? How do you access it? Generate the data, and what kind of reports are really important? And then we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and take a closer look at that data and identify some strategies, tips, best practices for understanding what all of those numbers, what does that data mean for your organization. A bit more about housekeeping. As I said, be sure your phone line is on mute by entering *6. Now during the presentations, I do invite you to utilize the chat box, which is the window to the left. And this is where you can insert any questions or comments. And what I'll be doing during the presentations is moderating that and keeping an eye on what we can address during question and answers following the presentation. And you do also have the option to raise your hand. There's a button for that if you want to be able to be taken off mute and ask a question verbally. Just a reminder, we do record the event, and we will be sending out after the event a link to the recording as well as slides and any resources related to the presentation. Now this is about social media, and if you are tweeting or interested in tweeting, we invite you to use the hashtag CalPactNM14 to get involved in the dialogue about the event today. Now our first presenter we're really excited to have here is Matt Schulte. He's at Metropolitan Group, and he spent his career designing, building, creating, and inspiring at the intersection of design and technology. And Matt's a rare combination of award-winning designer, filmmaker, and digital strategist, able to talk programming in the tech world, lead online branding and strategy work at the company level, direct and edit a film, and compose, perform, and record a soundtrack if need be. As Vice President of Digital Strategy for Metropolitan Group, Matt oversees all work that touches the digital space, from developing social media strategies that help clients extend their brand, engage audiences, and build advocacy, to understanding data and analytics, designing and developing websites and content strategies, as well as producing all of their film and video work. Matt is a busy man, and we are very excited to have him here today. And before we get started, we wanted to have a poll here, and I am just going to make sure that Matt is able to join us here. What we want to do is see how often do you access or use Google Analytics now? Is that daily, weekly, monthly, rarely, never? So I invite all of you to go ahead and submit your answer to that. Great. So it looks like this webinar is going to be really helpful to get a better understanding of how and why to use Google Analytics. And Matt, are you there? You there, Matt?
Hello?
Matt?
Yes.
Yes, great. Welcome.
Hi. So sorry, I think my headset didn't want to cooperate with me, so I'm holding the phone now.
No problem. This is an online environment, and social media, new media, we always deal with tech. And oftentimes we call it happy accidents because we learn from it and get used to the learning curve of always being able to deal with these things as they come up, because they don't go away, do they?
Well, not to mention that sometimes it's the old school stuff that doesn't work, like my phone.
Okay.
I see the responses are dinging up here on our poll. And it's really, I'm glad we're running this poll right now. We saw in the survey results from our pre-webinar survey that there was a pretty wide continuum in those responses of how people use Google Analytics. And it looks like the folks we have on the phone here are maybe leaning a little bit towards the haven't had a lot of experience with it. So that is really good to know, because part of what we're doing today is we're going to really start at sort of the very, the ground floor of it. And we'll talk through a little bit of the very basics of Google Analytics. And then I want to talk a little bit about not just the tool of the analytics, but also how you can use that tool in the service of the larger organizational strategies that you might have. And then following my presentation, Alex is going to weigh in and do a little bit of a deeper dive that I think everybody will find useful. And we'll also talk a little bit more in that section about a little bit of a deeper dive for those folks that are on the phone that have used it before. Without further ado, it looks like we've got over 80 responses, and nearly 70% of that is rarely and never. And I don't know if you can read it on the poll result there, but we are not judging you for that. So let's see. Should we, Lisa, should we go ahead and start going? There we go.
Yep.
Okay. So what are Google Analytics, or what is Google Analytics? I wasn't sure what the proper nomenclature was there. It's simply put that Google Analytics captures your website activity and measures your website's performance. Sounds easy. One of the things that we want to talk about for sure here is that it's just a tool. It's not a strategy. You need to be able to use this tool, hopefully, in the service of larger strategies that you have at your organization. Seems like a lot of stuff, and it is definitely the kind of a tool that you can keep going in, diving down. There's lots to know about Google Analytics, just like really any sort of software or application. But there's an awful lot of stuff that even the basics can be enormously helpful for you and your organization. So one of the things that I definitely recommend to clients and colleagues is that don't feel like you have to learn everything and know everything to start using Google Analytics and have it be useful. And I think it's just the same sort of advice you might give around using social media, where if you look at every tool available, it's going to be overwhelming. But if you focus on just a few key initial things, it's not so bad. You can dip your toe in the water and you can get where you need to go. So what kind of activity does Google Analytics capture for you? Again, there's all sorts of things, but for instance, how many visitors has your site had in a specific date range? We'll look at this later on, but you can look at what's happening on your site literally right now. You can look at what's happening on your site in the last week. If you had a campaign 2 weeks ago, you can look at what sort of activity you had during the campaign and then do a comparison to your normal traffic patterns. How did they get there? Did they get there from search, from Facebook, from other websites? That can be super useful to know. For instance, we just did a campaign and determined that nearly 20% of the visitors that we were having to our website were coming from a mobile Facebook app. So that's a great data point right there. If you're getting traffic from a specific type of user, is your website optimized to be able to handle that? It's a great question to be able to ask. What pages get the most visitors? I think that's it seems like a, well, no kidding kind of thing. By way of example, on one of our websites we found that the most often visited page was our jobs page. And one of the goals of our company is to sort of promote the power of voice with the clients and colleagues in the rest of the world. So we had this web page that was getting lots of traffic, but it was a jobs page that people would land on and then leave. But what we did is we changed the content there to try and engage the visitors when they landed there. So we created a little bit of a Twitter game to happen on that page and have people post tweets around what they considered their power of voice. So it's a way to look at the traffic that you're getting and then to evolve the content that you have so that it can address those visitors. What about website performance? For instance, what pages do visitors leave your site from? If you're trying to set up a pathway on your website to get them to a certain point on your website, whether that's a transactional sort of thing where they need to be purchasing something or you need them to sign up for something, and you've got a path that you want them to go through on your website to get there. If they're dropping off in the middle of that route, you need to know where that's happening and why. Average visitor time on your website, of course, can be important too if you're looking for really deep engagement. And all of these things sort of harken back to what's the content on your website and what is the goal that you have for the visitors to your website. What browsers are visitors using to access your site? Again, if you have a website that you need to appeal to certain audiences or you need it to be sort of universal, and you look at your browser data and you find out that, for instance, as we did on one project, that a very large number of people that were visiting our website were actually using Internet Explorer 8. Which is not it used to be a very common browser. It's starting to fall in usage, but I'll have to say that the percentage of visitors in a certain audience we were trying to reach that used IE8 was way, way above the average. So what we had to do to make sure that we had an optimal performance for our website for that audience, we had to do a little bit of recoding on the website to make sure that that very important audience could access everything they needed to access on our website. So that, again, it's not just knowing how to find that information in the analytics, but then what do you do with it? How can you change, evolve, or speak to the things that you see in those analytics? So, there is a lot there, but even those small data points that we're talking about right there can definitely, they can help you. It doesn't have to be a giant a giant dive in. So I'd like to right now go ahead and I'm going to try to share my desktop and show you just a few of the key sort of top level areas within Google Analytics that you're going to want to have a look at it at a minimum. And all of these things that we're going to look at right now, Alex is going to take a deeper dive into later on. So let me see if I can share my desktop. And what we're looking at here is the reporting landing page for Google Analytics. We have, you can see to the left, the typical navigation down the left-hand side there. And then across the top, at the very far right-hand corner, you can see the dates listed there. So this is it's very, like I said, it's very easy to be able to look at certain date groupings in order to see, what kind of traffic you're getting, especially if you're doing very specific sorts of events or initiatives on your online on your website. So these kinds of, again, super easy. Bam! Now you can see what's happening there, right? I have up here right now the what I was discussing before about the traffic and where's that traffic coming from. The referrals is what it's called. And I'll get to a little deeper dive on that in a second. Over here on the left-hand side, you see we have dashboards. These dashboards are something that you can set up and customize to the needs that you have. So this is the sort of thing where if there's very specific types of data that you'd like to have at a glance, it's very easy to set these up so that you can, again, take sort of a snapshot of what's happening on your site. On the left-hand side, this intelligence events. Basically, intelligence events is a fancy way of saying alerts. And it can generate a couple of different kinds of intelligence alerts. Google, monitors the website's traffic, obviously, to detect statistical variations, and then can automatically generate alerts. For instance, Google may warn you that you are getting some anomalous site visitors that you need to look into. You can also set custom alerts that are triggered and generated when traffic, for instance, reaches a specific threshold that you specify. You can opt in to receive an email or a text message notification when you create a custom alert. I would say that those sorts of things would fall under the deeper dive, not something that you have to do, something that is a nice to have. And once you get more familiar with Google Analytics, you'll be able to do that. The next thing here on our left hand is an overview of what's happening in real time on the website. So what I can say is it looks like no one is on this particular website right now, and that's sad. But this can be a useful tool when you're trying to determine success during a real-time event. Somebody's now, come on, somebody visit my website. These also shows, see now all kinds of folks are visiting. If you can see there that it's actually showing you locations as well, top locations. If you had traffic coming from social, you'd be seeing that as well. It also does a great job and an interesting job of showing you what the actual active pages are. Audience is a place that you're going to spend a lot of time on once you start working through the analytics pieces of it. Things like demographics and interests. These are things that apply most generally, or especially, I should say, when you're doing things like AdWords campaigns. Google, when it's doing its demographic research, basically when they're using cookies to deposit into the various browsers, and then when they interact with the Google AdWords or with your website, they're able to match not to the person but to the behavior and the computer demographic information. It is inferred demographic information as opposed to literal information. So demographics can be useful. That is a piece of, in order to implement, that will require additional piece of code to be added to your website in addition to the analytics that you'll use. And further down you can see things like that we were just discussing, things such as browsers and operating systems. And again, this is something that is useful to keep checking on because, as you know, if you've got a website, lots of browsers display things in a different way. So it's a great way to keep track of who's visiting using what. And below that, again, is another place you're going to be spending a lot of time on, or we'll want to focus some attention on, is acquisition, which is literally that. Where are people coming from? And that can be important for so many reasons. You can see all traffic here listed for our time, our date that we have. Organic Google is almost always going to be your top referrer, but you can see going further down that just in this particular instance, we have a fair amount of social media traffic as well as a percentage of our total traffic. And this shows all of our referrers on this particular website. Below that, in the same column, are the cost analysis where we start talking about AdWords, etc., and search engine optimization. The last thing I'm going to look at just real quick is this is where you can do a couple of things. You can determine where people are going on your site, but you can also do things like verify how well your site is performing from a technical point of view. Under site content, you'll see it has all these. It has all pages listed here, so you can see on this particular website that the home landing page is the #1 page view, but then team is the second most. This content drill down can be interesting because it shows you, for instance, where people go, what pathways that they are taking as they're going through your site. Below that, we have things like site search and events. Events are what I was referring to earlier about these are things that you can you set up to use in terms of something that somebody does on the website as opposed to just looking at pages. It's an action that you can set up to track. So that is just the brief sort of landing page for the analytics. One thing that I want to bring up that is another tool that you'll want to add to your toolbox, I think, but it might be when you're doing that deeper dive, and that is the Google Webmaster Tools. It allows you to do quite a few more types of analysis than you can do, and it gives you a more and a different sort of data than you get in the analytics view. So I think this is one. I was going to put a link for this here, and I left that out, but maybe we can add that afterwards, and how to get to the Webmaster Tools. But Google recommends that to be used whenever possible, because it does a couple of things. You can submit your site to Google, and not just the URL, but you can submit the actual site map for your site, and it helps Google to index your site more efficiently. Other things that the other things that it can do is it can check for technical problems that may be stopping Google from indexing. Check on links. You can see the popular keywords for your site. If you've been looking at Google Analytics for a while, you know that they don't show the keywords in the same way that they used to. And using Google Webmaster Tools, you can get a better idea about that. And check for malware or other intrusive technologies affecting your site. And Google often will send you an alert when they suspect something like that is happening. It's also something that you can use your Webmaster Tools to check on. One point I guess I'm trying to make is the data without strategy or analysis won't mean much and won't help much, so strategy is always going to be very important. It's most useful when your website has carefully defined goals and objectives. What does your website do or need to do to advance your business or brand goals? So what actions do you want them to take, and what leading to what goal? Do you want them to do downloads, something to download? Do you need them to sign up for something? Are you looking for mostly traffic? Are you doing a social media campaign? All these things you're going to want to think through in the kind of content that you develop, so that when you start getting analysis out of your Google Analytics, you can see if you're being successful. Objectives lead to goals, and then KPI, and I think we're going to have a little quiz about that. There's a key performance indicator, which is a metric that helps you understand how you are doing against the objectives that you've set up at the very beginning. So here's yes, we have another poll here. If you'd like to take the poll, that'd be great. How do you use KPI, a key performance indicator, to assess your website's effectiveness? And a lot of people are going to get back to me on this, which is fine. Yeah, I think that this is a key thing here, to be able, you can measure anything with the Google Analytics, but what are you measuring? So for instance, an example might be an objective of your website is or objective of your business might be increasing attendance at a health seminar. So the goal is to increase web signups for health seminars. Your key performance indicators then might be the number of signups that you need and the number of individual organization memberships perhaps. And so then you set a target for, okay, in order to meet my goal of increased attendance at health seminars, my target is I need to hit these points here. So the content strategy is crucial, I think, to be having for the Google Analytics to be very useful. And this is a out of left field, I'm sure, but does your organization have a content strategy, whether that's for your website or your social channels, or is this something that is just sort of a given when it comes to how you plot out your organization's business or brand goals? So it looks like lots of folks, so this is leaning very close to, lots of folks do have a content strategy. So what this says to me is if you have a content strategy, but you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily using perhaps maybe key performance indicators, there's a gap in there that would be great to look at in terms of, okay, if we do have a content strategy, are we driving it towards very specific and measurable goals? So that's something to consider there, I think. Just throwing this out there, if you do have a content strategy, do you have an editorial calendar to help you organize and prioritize your content so that going forward you can say, yes, we're launching this initiative here. We've got an editorial calendar so that we know that we're going to be hitting this stuff on our website at this point. We're going to be hitting this stuff in our social channels at the same time, and then measuring all of that as you're going through your initiative. Are you using social media? Driving them back to your website. You can use Google Analytics to track how that is happening. Does your content have calls to action? And that speaks back to the need for identifying what you want folks to do when they get there, right? When they get to your website. And now, analytics can help you assess the success as long as you've defined success. We've had some questions about how to add Google Analytics to your site. It's fairly easy, but you do need to add a piece of code to your website. It's easily found on the website, and then Google needs to verify that. So it might require just a few minutes of technical help on that end to add it. Same with adding things like the webmaster tools. Basically, in terms of our simple overview here, my takeaways for everybody is start with the basics and don't feel like you have to know everything for it to be useful for you. How you use Google Analytics ideally is connected to your content strategy. So if you've got analytics and you do have a content strategy, but you're not marrying the two, you're not hooking those two together so that Google Analytics is actually helping you assess the success of that content strategy, then that's something to look at. So objectives, goals, KPI, targets, and then webmaster tools. I think once you get a good understanding of the fundamentals of Google, then you'll want to take that step up to adding the webmaster tools and taking some time to understand those, because you'll find Google can index you more efficiently, and also you'll be able to get deeper and broader data. So that's my pitch there. Should we do a Q&A, Lisa?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm also going to just take our other presenter off mute, Alex, so that you can both be available to field some of these great questions that we came in. Now, I think we answered the question from Mary Carmen about getting set up with linking to Google Analytics from the get-go. We had from the beginning a good question from Adam about, let's see here, is there a good standard dashboard that you would recommend setting up?
Yeah, I think that there are standard ways, and really the default is not bad on Google Analytics itself. I think what you'll find is after you dive into the analytics themselves, you'll start to see which parts of the reporting that you can do are going to be most crucial for you. So I mean, it's definitely, there's certain things like, you need to know what your most visited pages are. I'm particularly interested in knowing the geographical outline of the visitors to our website. I'm particularly interested in the browser and or platform that people are accessing it through. As we're starting to move very much towards a platform independent world when creating content and websites. So I'm always very interested in that. So I think it's, the default's pretty good. It's pretty easy to add stuff to your dashboard. And I think Alex might actually be addressing that in the next bit.
And also, Matt, just to add on,
Yeah.
Adam had asked also to get a little bit more specific. Do you feel that the default is good for an organization that might have the capacity to check analytics more than about one time a month?
If they're checking analytics more often, and is the default good enough for that? Is that the question?
It sounds like his organization, they're really just doing the analytics check once a month. They don't really have the capacity to do it more than that.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I think it is. I think that the thing to do, in my opinion, during that one time you check a month is, do you have a checklist of the things that you're looking for? I think that's the most important thing. That checklist, I don't have one handy to show, but do you need to know what the most visited pages are, and do you need to know the browser technology? Do you need to know your referrers, right? And if they're not in that default view, it's very easy to add them. Does that make sense?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, yay!
Hey, it's Alex. So I actually will be going through a process that I call like an audit or an assessment, and I would recommend that it's a process that you could do if you're only checking things monthly. So if you stay on the line, then hopefully that question will get answered.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And we'll take a couple more questions. Matt, we had a question from Andrew, which is kind of nice because we're talking about what you're doing. He was wondering if you could actually interpret a piece of the data that we've seen, or if this is something that Alex is going to get into more in depth.
Well, I'm sure Alex is going to get into that, but I think that, just even sort of those top-level interpretations that I was talking about in terms of looking at, for instance, like the browser behavior. Being able to look at that and say, okay, what am I looking at and why is it important? And being able to see it and say, oh, look, I've got this last week I've had an inordinate number of people visiting the website using a browser that's not fully supported, i.e. 8. And so that led to the decision to do some refinement on our website content to make it more accessible. And the same thing with the Facebook referrer thing almost, where it was we had a client that was getting a lot of traffic from mobile, but they had not optimized their website to be a really great experience on mobile. So that then became a priority.
Great. And just to let everyone know, Ariana had a good question about the average number of visitors for a nonprofit site. And Alex just shared with everybody a great resource for that, looking at some benchmark reports published by M+R or by Blackbaud. So we're going to keep track of some of these resources that are shared, and I invite you all to go ahead and put that in the chat box if you know of some that we can point everyone to on a resources doc that we'll share with links to the recording and the slides after the event. And let's take just a couple more questions here. A little bit getting back to, I think, Charlene was wondering if you have any new or innovative ideas on how to develop a content strategy, because that definitely was an important key component of this that you touched on, Matt.
Yeah. Can I share my desktop again real quick?
I think so.
All right. Let's see what happens. So we were working with a client who was trying to think about how did they develop a content strategy, and they had a website that they worked very hard on, and they had a lot of different social media channels that they were using. But my observation of what they were doing is they were putting a lot of effort into putting content on their website and their blog that spoke to the kinds of issues that their audience was interested in. So they would do a blog post about, subject A, and then they'd do a Facebook post about that same sort of subject. But they weren't really affecting any change in that audience. They weren't getting them to do anything, and it wasn't really connected to anything other than the shared interest they had in that subject with the audience. So what we did is we looked at the actual initiatives that they were working on for that year and decided that their content strategy was going to be led by that. So we created this very easy checklist to say, okay, the content that you're going to put on your website and through your social channels, it needs to address or align with one of these or more of these initiatives that you're actually working on. So that helped them organize the content and prioritize the content better. So they weren't just throwing stuff over the transom because they thought it would be interesting. They were actually tying it as effectively as they could and aligning it as effectively as they could to the actual work they were doing. So they would just march through this, say, okay, which one of these is our priority, and how does this post align with it? Why is it important to share? What is the outcome we're aiming for with this piece of content? And if you don't have an outcome, then you might want to consider is it worth putting the time in to post it? And then what's the call to the action for the reader? Who are the priority audiences? And then figuring out how to highlight the channel. So every time they want to post something, they, at a minimum, do a gut check on all of these kinds of things so that they can have it align with their actual business and brand goals.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And that was a wonderful presentation and just so much rich information. And it's a wonderful segue into our next presenter's content with Alex really taking us on a deeper dive. So I'm just going to wrap up the Q&A for now, and I just remind everybody that we will have some time for questions and discussion after Alex's as well. And if we weren't able to get to some of your questions now, we'll do our best then. And also, if there's particular questions that are easy to answer, we'll do our best to answer those in the resource document that we'll put together and point you in the direction of resources and links and articles that will be helpful to answer some of those questions that we might not be able to get to. So thank you so much, Matt. And I want to introduce our next wonderful presenter. Alex Bernadi has been building websites since before it was cool. Way, 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 way back when in 1996. Time has really sped up, so that does seem a long time ago now, huh? Currently, he's the digital content manager for San Francisco AIDS Foundation, where he oversees a dozen websites and several email programs. Wow. Previously, Alex worked at Kintera, which is now Blackbaud, where he helped a long list of nonprofits navigate the intricacies of data migrations, website redesigns, and email targeting strategies. And in other lives, he's been and sometimes still is a software engineer, a certified project manager, and a photographer. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for the questions that have been posted so far. Thanks, Matt, for giving us an overview of the tools and kind of getting our feet wet in here. I'm excited that there are so many folks who actually have not done a ton of analytics. Analytics is a really big and rich tool, so welcome. It's a brand new world that you're stepping into, and it has a lot of potential, I think, for helping you to do your jobs well. We're going to open up with another cool question. This one might seem like it's coming out of nowhere, but it'll make sense later. Do you already have conversion goals set up in your analytics? So for those of you who have set up analytics already and are making use of it, have you set up conversion goals yet? That's the question. Conversion goals tend to be very specific to an organization and to a website in particular. It has to do with outcomes, like Matt was talking about, objectives that you are hoping your visitors will accomplish. So for many nonprofits, that'll be, I really hope someone makes a donation. It might be, I really hope someone registers for an event. But it could also be very content-oriented. It could be goals like, I hope that people spend a certain amount of time reading the content on my pages. It might be, I hope that people read a certain number of pages. That might be what I consider to be a conversion goal because I have a blog site and I really want folks to digest that content. So conversion goals can be a lot of different things. It's a great way to start to integrate with your, sorry, I'm being told to speak up a little bit. I'll try my best. It's a great way to integrate with your content strategy and your overall site intentions and to have analytics reflect that in the reporting. So conversion goals are really powerful. They have a lot of potential. And if you haven't explored them, then I would recommend that you do so. There are resources out there that will help you to figure out how to create them and how to set them up in analytics and also to translate your content strategy into conversion goals. What I'm going to cover today is going to be two common scenarios. The first one is going to be what I would call like a holistic assessment of a website. It's roughly speaking an audit of how a site looks in analytics. And it's something that I might do, or I would do for sure, when I first take over a website or when I'm being asked to take responsibility for a website. I'm going to do an audit of it in analytics to see what's going on. And it might also be something that I do quarterly or possibly monthly. So if you only have a small amount of time in your year for doing analytics work, then this is definitely a process that I would recommend that you go through on a monthly basis or perhaps quarterly. It's going to be pretty high level. I'm going to move fairly quickly through the process, but hopefully it'll give you some food for thought and it'll let you pick out, okay, if I only have a half hour, what would I do? What would I look at? The second scenario I'm going to go through is going to be to talk about how you might answer some specific questions using analytics. So please do feel free to post questions into the chat area and we'll flag them and hopefully I'll have time at the end to loop back and point you towards a report that you might want to look at that would possibly answer that question. Bit of housekeeping. I will call out a couple of tips that are going to be considered more advanced. I'll refer to them as pro tips, and they're things that I would say you might want to look into if you do have a little more experience or you do have a little bit more of an expertise working with the system. These are areas where you can dig a little bit more deeply, and you might get a little bit more insight, a little bit more value out of the tool if you poke your nose into those corners. I've also posted, in addition to you guys getting the slides, and I think that Lisa's going to send around possibly a PDF of other resources, I've got a blog that I run at alexjbconsulting.com. I'm not actually a full-time consultant, but I run a blog. And I've posted a couple of things there that are pertinent to this session and to using analytics as a nonprofit in general. So I suggest you take a look over there to see some additional info. First up, I'm going to make a big assumption when I dive into this that all of your tracking has been set up correctly. And I want to point out that this is often not true. There are a lot of times when there are gaps in analytics setup and there's gaps in how tracking is working. And it can be true even if your main site is tracking correctly, some parts of your site might not be tracking correctly. So I do recommend that if you can, work with someone with a pretty good technical expertise who can assess and make sure that your site is tracking correctly. Because if you don't, then you're going to be drawing conclusions that could not only be like poorly informed, but you might actually be misinformed. There might actually be incorrect information that's reflected in the analytics reports if the tracking is not set up correctly. And I did make a blog post for this, identifying some of the common pitfalls in tracking setup that I had hoped to incorporate into this talk, but didn't really fit into the timeline. So without further ado, I'm going to start desktop sharing, and we're going to take a look at the analytics reporting screens specifically for San Francisco AIDS Foundation's primary website. So we're going to be looking at real data. As soon as I flip over to the ReadyTalk screen and remember how to do the share, there we go, sharing, and I'll share my desktop. Hopefully you guys are seeing my screen, and hopefully Lisa's going to let me know if you're not. When I access analytics.google.com, first I get to see the nice smiling person who obviously loves analytics. That's great. I click through to get to the real tools, and I'm shown a list of all of my properties. I tend to use the starred approach to jump directly to the properties I usually look at. So we're going to be looking at SFAF's main profile. On the left-hand side, I've got a little Google Doc I put together with the checklist that I run through when I do an assessment, when I do a site audit. So you can sort of see where I'm going, and then I flagged the pro tip or the pro advanced reports that I would look at with a little P. The first screen that comes up is the audience overview. As Matt pointed out, Google groups its reports at a high level into what I refer to as the ABCs. It's audience and acquisition, behavior, and conversions. And when I do an assessment, I step through those ABCs at a very high level, and it gives me a basic view of how healthy a site is. The audience overview itself, the first screen that Google Analytics brings you to, is actually a very high-level status screen. And if you were only going to look at one screen in here, you could look here and you would get a really basic idea of, is the site alive? Is there traffic? Is it basically running correctly? First thing I'm going to do, because I'm doing a high-level assessment, is change my time frame. I want to see more than just 1 month's worth of data. I'm going to go back for a full year, because that's going to give me a pretty good-sized amount of information to look at, and plus it lets me say, well, over the last year we got about blah, 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 which is kind of nice to be able to do. I click Apply, and immediately I'm getting some insights here, right? There's a pretty clear trend as far as traffic on this site. A year ago, we were seeing roughly 600 to 700 visits per day, and when I hover over the trend line, the pop-up shows me the specific value of the trend line at that point at that time. Now we're seeing almost 6,000 or 7,000 visits per day. So that's a pretty sizable increase right away. I've got an insight that I can share and get a high five from my VP. Hey, look, we increased our traffic really significantly. Some other really high-level insights that come away from here. We had 1 million unique visitors last year. That's what I get from these sort of high-level numbers that Google shows me as part of this report. And I can see the mini trend line below. I can see that my bounce rate has stayed pretty flat over the year. My visit duration has varied somewhat, but it's mostly flat. Pages per visit has stayed pretty flat. So this report lets me know super snapshot. My site's alive, yay. And it's improving, yay. If this number were going down, I'd be like, holy crap, my site's losing traffic, what's going on? And I immediately also start to see some spikes, I see some low levels, and I see weekly patterns that emerge as well. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, then you might want to explore under audience, you might want to look into the Geo Subreports or the technology subreports. Those are going to tell you things like where do our visitors come from exactly? What technology are they using? And Matt spoke to some of this. In particular, an advanced report that I would suggest you explore is in the behavior subgroup. There's one for frequency recency and there's one for engagement. And both of those have some rich insights if you've got time to explore them, which unfortunately I don't right now. My next step when doing an assessment is to go into the acquisition area. Acquisition, as Matt said, is where did I acquire visitors from? Where did my visitors come from? What are the sources of my traffic? The overview report under acquisition is a really differently laid out report, and it can be kind of daunting. It's a little bit weird to look at it. I'll break it down for you just a little bit, and I suggest that you just kind of sit with it and spend a little time. A lot of times when using Google Analytics, if you start nosing around, you can begin to get an impression of what the data is that's being reflected. But also I recommend that you look for tutorials and other websites that let you dive deeper into specific reports. What this report's trying to show you is, again, a really high-level snapshot. It's grouping your traffic sources into what Google calls channels. So there's direct traffic. Those are people who typed in your web address into their browser and came directly to your site. And then there's search traffic. There's organic and there's paid. Organic search means I typed in a query in Google, results came up, I clicked on a result. Paid search is I've typed a query in Google and an ad came up on the side or at the top, and I clicked on the ad. So it's an important distinction. Organic search is free and is kind of reflective of how well you've done your search engine optimization. Paid search means you're using AdWords or something similar on Bing or Yahoo to get your traffic, and that's fine, perfectly legit strategy. But ultimately on this report, what I'm looking for is kind of a diverse spread of traffic sources. I want to make sure that as much as possible I'm getting direct and organic search traffic. And paid search is okay, referral traffic is great, but if those are the dominant traffic sources for me, then the site is kind of on shaky ground, right? Because if I stop paying for ads, then my traffic is going to suddenly go away. Down towards the bottom, you see the channel social. That captures Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, other things like that. Other things that might be hiding under referral is if you get listed somewhere on another site like Huffington Post or New York Times, and that might account for a traffic spike. The other columns that are in this report are about behavior and conversions. We're going to dig into behavior separately, but what Google's trying to show us here is the correlation between traffic sources and their behavior. People who came directly to my site have a bounce rate, this column is highlighted, of 80.8%. That's a little bit high. People who came to my site from organic had a bounce rate of 77%. So this is how this table works. The rows and columns line up, and it's trying to give us some insights into how people from various sources acted when they got to the site. And then finally, the conversions column tells us if they completed one of our goals, if they did something we wanted them to do. For example, did they give as part of the year-end campaign? That's the goal that I've set up here as year-end funnel. And I see that the majority of people who converted, who completed my goal, came from my email channel. So that's insightful, and that tells me something about what's going on with this website. All right, I'm going to move on because I probably spent a little bit more time on that than I should have, but hopefully it was useful. And I can't actually see the chat window while I'm doing the desktop share. So Lisa, if there's something that really is important for me to pause and take note of, you should probably just interrupt me. Okay, pro tips under acquisition. I would say you can look into the All Referrals report. That's going to give you a deeper dive as far as what's going on with specific referral sources. You can also look into your AdWords sub-report area or your search engine optimization sub-report area. Those are only going to really be helpful if you connected those other accounts to your analytics account, which is something that I do recommend you do, if at all possible. If you've got the technical expertise within your group to do that, I do recommend that you do it. And both of those reports are going to give you kind of a deeper insight into what's going on with your site. Alrighty, I'm actually going to flip out of desktop share mode, which will let me, of course, see the chat room again, which is great. But I think we're going to do another quick poll because I want to see how everyone's doing with what we've shown so far. Let me see if I pull that up correctly. Nope. Lisa's trying to do it, and I'm trying to do it. Oh, my God. Okay, are you still with me? Is this working? Am I talking ridiculously fast? So chime in. Let me know how you're doing, and then we're going to bounce into the behavior area. We're going to dig into that section of the reporting a little bit more deeply. All right, so far so good. If you're completely overwhelmed, you better speak up quickly with your mouth, or else we're going to bounce ahead. Meantime, taking a quick look at questions. How is the bounce rate defined, and what are some strategies to reduce a bounce rate? We will definitely dig into that bounce rate when we start looking at the behavior reports. It's a good question, and it's an important concept to know. It's an important concept to be aware of.
Also,
so I think we're doing
sorry, it's Lisa here. There was a quick question, and it was kind of displayed not too long ago. Let's see. It was a question about what is display. It was one of the fields that was on that you could filter by. Yep.
It's a channel group is display. So let me see if I pull it up. I'll do a share again, and we'll see what's in there. I'm actually not entirely sure. I'm pretty sure that display is another type of ad. Yeah, and as I dig into that particular channel, I'll do a desktop share again because I'm about ready to flip back anyway.
Okay, great.
Link
Thanks.
share desktop. So what I did here was I was looking at the overview, and this is a good way to kind of familiarize yourself in the tools. Click around. For the most part, you're not going to break your system by clicking around inside of analytics. You can get lost, and you can lose half an hour or 2 hours of your time clicking around. But as you click around, you're going to, the information will kind of reveal itself, has been my experience. So when I'm looking at this report and I say, well, what the heck channel is this display? What does that mean anyway? I don't know. What is it? Click on it, and I see, okay, well, whatever it is, it had a huge spike in July, and it's not really showing up otherwise. So it seems to be kind of an isolated thing. When I look at the details under it, I see that there are 3 sources that have been identified as display. And these groupings are determined by Google. They set up the initial definition of these groupings. You can actually change those definitions. But what this tells me is Grindr is an app. It's a mobile app that gay guys use to hook up. We had done an ad campaign that incorporated ads in the Grindr app. And so Google interpreted those ads as display ads. Other places where ads appeared for us were Bay Area Reporter, which is a local publication, and Here Media, which is kind of an aggregate advertiser. So in this case, that tells me, because I know what those were, it tells me, oh, display is a certain type of ad. It's not a search ad. It's another type of ad. But it kind of gives me that conclusion by clicking through and looking at more details underneath that channel. Hopefully that was helpful, and I definitely do recommend that you nose around a little bit when these things come up. From this main overview report, you can see up top there's the link that says Edit Channel Grouping, and that's where you can change which sources are bundled together into a channel. All right,
Thanks,
so
Alex.
moving on.
And I know Ariana had raised her hand. Ariana, if you're able to ask your question quickly, you can take your phone off mute by pressing *7, and then we need to move on. Or Ariana, alternately, you could put your question or comment in the chat box, and we can save that and address it during Q&A. Ariana, are you there? Why don't we go ahead and do that? We'll move on. We'll address your comment, Ariana, about using constant contact that can't be captured in acquisition overview. So maybe Alex at the end will revisit that.
Sure, no problem. And when you get more familiar with using analytics in a more advanced way, there are ways that when you're making links to your site, you can incorporate tracking information into the link. And when you do that, that will affect the way that the source is identified by Google. You can explicitly identify a campaign, a source, a medium, all those things in a link that you provide, which you can then use in an email or you can use through Bitly. And that way you can drive this report. You can really control what shows up here and how your traffic gets identified. But again, pro tip. So moving on, I'm doing a high-level assessment. I look at the screen and say, okay, I have a good spread of diversity in my incoming traffic. That's a good thing. Now I want to know behavior. I want to know what happens when people come to the site. What do they do? What pages do they interact with? How do they engage with my website? This is really at the heart of the tool, and it's where I spend most of the time if I'm doing an assessment or if I'm answering questions. So the behavior section, the behavior overview, is another great overview report where analytics really has rolled up what are the most common important metrics, and they show them to you right up front. I've got a big trend line right in front of me, same trend line as was on the audience report. And with this trend line, as true anywhere in the tool, above it and to the right, you see I can switch from looking at data points by day. I can switch to data points by week or by month. The effect of that will be to smooth out that line, which can be helpful when you want to see trends and when you want to see really significant bumps, like late July and early December. There's really significant traffic bumps here. And then if I look at the month view, even those start to smooth out, and I just kind of get a quick snapshot of where are we going over a year, which can be helpful. When I look at the day view, that's when my weekly pattern becomes really clear. I can tell that at the beginning of the week, we get most of our traffic for the week. Traffic levels are higher by far compared with the weekend. Not many people visiting our site on the weekend. And this is a pattern that's really solid on this particular website. So that's an insight that I can then use when I'm talking about planning for content release. I'll know what to expect because I know what the historical patterns have been. What they did with this report was to show us the top 5 metrics that are most often used at a site level to indicate the site health. Page views, unique page views, average time on page, bounce rate, and percent exit. And you saw when I hovered over each of those, they provide you a little bit of a cheat sheet explanation of what the metric is when I hover over the title. There's some important distinctions here I want to call out. Difference between page views and unique page views. And Google provides us a little bit of an explanation, but the way that I tend to think about it is, okay, Matt came to my site and he visited, he searched for something and it drove him to sfaf.org. Great. He clicked and he came to the first page. Maybe he saw what he wanted, maybe he didn't. So he starts clicking around the site a little bit. He clicks here, clicks there, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Somewhere in there he loops back to the first page he came to and he visits that again. And then he goes through a couple of the other pages that he visited and he sees them more than once. If I count each page he viewed each time he viewed it, that's page views. If I count only each of his views to the first page, if I say that only counts as 1, because that's a unique page view. That's one person looking at that page. Even if they looked at it 5 times in a session, it's only one person that I'm reaching. And so that's unique page views. I tend to focus on unique page views because it correlates more closely to what I think of as visitors or eyeballs or visits. And that to me is more indicative overall of what's going on the site. But you might choose to do differently. What is notable is if there's a big delta between page views and unique page views, that tells me something about what's going on with the site. It tells me something about how people interact with the site. Time on page and bounce rate at this level, at the site level, kind of holistically, are problematic because they're really reflecting such a breadth of data. I can use the trend lines from them, and I can open up any of these trend lines into the big one by clicking on the little snapshot underneath, or by using this drop-down that's next to the trend line. I can switch between any of the 5. But at the, at the site level, this as a single metric, average time on page or bounce rate, are problematic because it's rolling together all the hits. And as you see, we had over 1 million unique page views for this year. And that's a lot of data to roll into a single bounce rate number. This bounce rate and average time on page are going to be more significant when we look at individual pages. But for now, I'm going to use these trend lines to say, hey, my bounce rate across the board, pretty steady. Not much improvement there for the site as a whole. Time on page, it's staying in a pretty tight range across the whole year. Not a lot of change there. If I had introduced a whole bunch of new techniques to try to budge that metric, and I came to this overview, I'd want to know whether or not I'd made a significant difference. And so that's what these overview reports are good for at the kind of site level audit / assessment level. Pause for a second, and I'm going to talk about bounce rate. The shorthand for what a bounce is, which this dude named Avinash Kaushik, he came up with this, and he's a brilliant guy. He talks a lot about web analytics, and I strongly recommend you check him out. His name is weird, so I'll reference it again at the end. The way he describes it is, a bounce is, I came, I puked, I left. From a technical perspective, a bounce is, I entered the site on one page, I looked at that one page, and I didn't look at any other pages on the site for that session. I left. That's a bounce. It's a little different from an exit. An exit means I come into the site, I look at a bunch of pages, and at some point, that's the last page I looked at. That's the page I exited from. But a bounce means I only looked at that one page. Most of us want our visitors to engage with more than one page. So most of us would prefer if our bounce rate was low. This is the one metric where lower is better. In general, 80% is kind of a threshold. If you're over 80%, it feels like you might be in trouble. It depends a little bit on the type of site you're dealing with, but that's a general metric. Under 60 is considered pretty good for a bounce rate. So as I'm doing my assessment, I come to this overview page. I say, okay, my overall site bounce rate is under 80. My time on page is this. My unique page views is that. These are the trends I'm seeing. So I kind of digest this and I say, okay, that's cool, that's cool. Are there any areas or time frames that I really want to dig into later? I'm going to make a note. Something happened in early December that got a lot of traffic. Something happened in late July that got a lot of traffic. I make a note of that. I write it down. And then I come back and visit it later, and I do a deep dive and try to figure out what happened. When I do that dive, I'm going to use annotations to make a note of exactly what it was that happened. Those are these little text bubbles that show up at the bottom of the trend line. The text bubbles correspond to a specific date. And when I click on one, or when I click on this little tab below the trend line, it expands and shows me all those annotations. It's a really powerful way, or really useful way, to make a note about what was going on the site at that time. And if I look at July, I see, oh, late July is when we started the PosForce ad campaign, including Grindr. And when we looked at that other report from the acquisition, we saw that there was this huge spike in traffic coming from Grindr in that time frame. Maybe that explains this traffic bump. And so now I don't have to remember that on my own, or I don't have to be the one who made that note. Anyone with access to this analytics account could have made that annotation, and when I come in to do my assessment, I say, oh, right, that was the Grindr traffic that caused that bump. So now I know that, and I can explain it to the VP when he asks, well, what was that traffic spike? Oh, my God, what was that about? So pro tips in here, in the behavior area in general, would be to dive into these different reports, and then to explore segments. Segments is a huge, rich functional area in Google Analytics. Not going to dive into it today because most of you have not spent a lot of time with analytics, and so you're not going to necessarily make sense. But I will show you it's what this piece of the interface is for. This circle up above that's showing all visits, if I click next to it, I can choose to identify different slices of my traffic and see what they did distinct from just the general all traffic. I drag this mobile and tablets up into the upper bar and click Apply. Now instead of one trend line, I get two. The blue one is all my traffic. The orange one is just my mobile and tablet traffic. And there's huge insights to be had here as well. I can immediately see that half my traffic is mobile, and it tracks really tightly with the rest of my traffic. That tells me that my mobile users are having a very similar experience to my regular desktop users. That's great. My bounce rate is almost the same between mobile and all my traffic. That's also really good. Average time on page, actually people on mobile are using the site for longer on average per page than people on desktops. That's great. So there's a lot of insights that can be had when you start exploring slicing and dicing your data using segments. It's a rich, complex topic, and I'm not going to say anything else about it, but you should definitely look into it if you have the capacity. I'm going to remove that segment, simplify my report again. And the last area where I'd really spend a lot of time if I'm doing a high-level audit assessment is going to be digging in under behavior, digging into the site content subgroup, and looking at the all pages report. This is the report where we get into the greatest amount of detail. This lists one row for every URL that got tracked by Google Analytics for that time frame. And it shows us the key metrics for those pages. The ones I'm interested in here are unique page views, entrances, and bounce rate. Matt was saying you might be interested in percent exit. That's a possibility depending upon what question you're trying to answer. But for me, top level assessment, unique page views, average time on page, unique page views, entrances, and bounce rate. The thing I'm going to do almost every time is expand beyond just 10 rows. I'm going to go for as many rows as I can. I want to see 5,000 rows in this report. The reason for that is because I get insights from looking at the top 10, right? I can immediately see, holy cow, I got 2 huge heavy hitter pages here. I've got 2 pages that got 3 times as many views as the next one down. And they got 5 or 6 times as many unique page views as my home page. That's pretty significant, and it's probably worth a little bit of investigation. I assure you I know exactly what those pages are. This little icon next to each URL will open a separate window with the actual page, which is helpful if you don't know the site very well. You can see what is that page. In my case, it's a page about HIV test window period. And if I clicked on the actual URL in this list, it would take me to a more detailed report about that page where I can look at all sorts of metrics about it, sources, behaviors, all that kind of stuff. When I'm doing my assessment, I mainly want to focus on what are my top pages? What are the most popular pages of the site? What's the most popular entrance points for the site? 23% of my visitors entered the site on this HIV test window period. Only 3% of my visitors entered the site on the home page. That's hugely significant insight in terms of talking with people about what the website does and how well it works. Likewise, bounce rate. This page on HIV information in Spanish, 91% bounce rate. 91%, 9 out of 10 people who came to this site on that page, they entered on that page, they did not look at any other pages on the site. And yet, it's one of my top 5. This is a huge insight. This is highly significant and warrants further investigation. So I'm going to make a note, holy crap, 91%. Holy crap, 95% bounce rate on the meningitis page. What's up with that? The other thing I'm going to do, which is the reason why I wanted to expand it to 5,000 rows, is I'm going to scroll way to the bottom, down into the single page view range, right? Down into this territory. What I'm looking for here is, what the heck are all these single view pages and why are they way at the bottom of the report? Are these pages that are total failures? Or, 404s, not surprising. I don't expect that there will be multiple views on a 404 page. But another pattern that comes up a lot is that you'll see something like this, where it's probably a bunch of the same page, but the URLs look different to Google because they have some kind of unique number in them. This is an opportunity for you to get in with your techie people and say, hey, we got to build some filters because this site/CO page is showing all these variations on it. I think it's actually the same page. And if I combined all those into one row using a filter in the admin area, then that would give me some significant insight that I'm probably losing here because these are all showing up as separate rows. So that's a step that I always do when I'm going to do my overall health assessment. Searches within the site is another thing that tends to show up down at the bottom of this report. And this is going to tell me if I've got search activity that I want to have tracked by Google, which is another thing that I need to set up in the admin area so that Google Analytics recognizes what my search URLs look for. So scrolling down to the bottom of that report is a hugely helpful thing to do, and it's something that I always incorporate into an assessment. As far as if you wanted to dig even deeper as a pro, the areas I would recommend you check out under behavior are going to be your site search reporting area and your, what's the other one, events. Site search we talked about. Events is another area where there's big opportunities for tracking things, but it does require a fair amount of intention and a fair amount of configuration work. You can see that we do use it, and there's something in here that had a lot of spikes that was related to our year-end campaign. And it can provide huge, huge, huge insights as far as what people are doing when they're interacting with your site. but it just requires a lot more work to get that going. Final area, conversions. You'll notice that conversions does not have an overview report. This is because conversions are very specific to how you set up your site. It has to do with goals, and it has to do with translating your content strategy into the key metrics that you want to track and translating those into what Google Analytics calls goals. I noticed that most of you have not set up conversion goals. It's a rich area. It offers a lot of opportunity. You can track, for example, I'll show you really quickly a report that's kind of compelling. This is called a funnel, the visualization funnel. And the notion is, hey, I have a donation form, and it's 3 clicks from the time you enter. 3 clicks from entering the site to completing your donation. How many people made it all the way through? That's a funnel. What this report shows me is where people fall off the path. We started with 139 people. We ended, oh, that's not right. 139 people made it through the first step from the initial 2,700 people. Only 5% made it through the first step. Holy crap. 44% made it from step 2 to the final step. Okay, that's pretty good. But if I had 4 or 5 steps in my process and people were dropping off along the way, I would want to know what was up with that. I would need to investigate that. So if your site has these configured, then it's definitely something that I would incorporate as part of my high-level assessment. I won't be able to put any more attention on that right now because I'm probably way over time as it is. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can go back and see what's going on in the chat. We can dig into some of those things a little bit more in the Q&A if that's helpful. For the moment, I'm going to do a little quick recap. What are we doing when we're doing an assessment? We're going through the ABCs. We're going through audience and acquisition. We're going through behavior. We're going through conversions if we have them. And so if you stick with the high-level overview reports, you actually will get a lot of reasonable insights. And then you'll kind of come back and visit again and go over the more detailed reports that are open, that are available to you. All right. I see that I passed the 5-minute mark. I don't know exactly when that was. So Lisa, if you want to tell me how much time I have left, and I can decide how many of our deeper dive questions I'll be able to dig into before we just shift to Q&A. Or I'll just sally forth.
Hi, Alex. Probably about 3 more minutes. And
okay.
Just want to tell everybody thanks so much for your questions. If we don't get to them, we will put together a doc and do our best to address them in the resources doc. Thanks.
Cool.
Alex.
And I see, thank you, Matt, for covering me in the chat room there and addressing some of those questions. There's so much deep possibilities to get into once you're in here. It can take forever. So when you'd want to dive a little bit more deeply is when you get to some specific questions that often management will have or that you have when you're trying to follow up on the anomalies and gaps and opportunities that you found when you were doing your assessments, right? So I'm going to cover a couple of those common ones. So a common one is, oh my God, we need to do a mobile redesign. Well, do you really need to do a mobile redesign? Maybe your site's working fine. Who knows? Well, Google Analytics knows. Where would you look to see the answer to this question? I would primarily focus on using segmentation myself because that allows me to look in the behavior area of the reporting, which is really page specific. I would look at my heavy hitter pages and I would do a segment and split the view to see all traffic versus mobile traffic. And I would see whether or not the mobile visitors are behaving the same way, or if there's a really high bounce rate for mobile, or if there's really low time on page for mobile. That's going to tell me whether or not mobile users are using the site just as well as desktop users. If you wanted a quick answer to this question, I would use the audience report. Under audience, you'll find a mobile group, and then you'll find an overview. That report will give you a quick impression of how much mobile traffic you're getting and how are they behaving. You can look at the percentage of uniques that come from desktop versus mobile, and you can look at bounce rate and pages per visit at a very, very high level. But segmentation is really going to give you a much more solid answer to that and a much more specific answer to that. How many page views did we get this month? Very common question. Don't answer that question. It's a terrible, terrible question. What you want to redirect people towards is how many visitors did we get? How many people, human beings, actually came to the site? That's a much more, in my opinion, that's a much more significant metric, and it's a much better focus for us to have as people who run websites. Page views vary significantly between your site based on how your site is organized. If I have a site which only has like one paragraph of text on every page, my page views are going to be through the roof. If I have a site where every page has 10 paragraphs of text, well then my page views are going to be really, really low. But does that mean that people are digesting it? That's a whole other question. So page views is misleading and problematic, and you can't really compare one site to another based on page views. But if you can get it to visitors, you're going to have a much better comparative metric. Let's see. We talked about so people will often say, oh, we should put this on the homepage because I want everyone to see it. The homepage is almost never your most popular page because the homepage is almost never how most people come into your site. The reports that are going to let you show you data to back this up is going to be under behavior, where we looked at it, under site content, and under landing pages. That's going to show you your top site entry points. And that's going to be a really useful tool when you're talking to people about where should we put feature XYZ so that a lot of people will see it. It's probably not the homepage. Last one I'll hit. So-and-so thinks we really ought to be posting more on Facebook because it will drive traffic to our site. Is that true? It's highly arguable, debatable, but there's real data behind it. Where does the data live? A couple of different places. Acquisition, because we're talking about where did the traffic come from, so it's under acquisition, and there's a specific subgroup of reports called social, and under there's reports for network referrals. You can also dig into that report more and look at the landing page specifically on that report, and it'll show you who came in from social and what page did they go to. The other way to do this is, again, to use segmentation. If you go into behavior, because you want to see what pages people looked at, you can then segment and say, show me slices of visitors grouped by where they came from, their source. Show me all the visitors who came from Facebook, all the visitors who came from Twitter, all the visitors who came from Reddit. And that will give you a really solid answer to the question, was it worthwhile? Did we get traffic coming from our promotions that we ran on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and all that other energy we invested? Okay, that's it. I feel like I've talked like lightning speed. I hope it was digestible. I hope it was useful. We're going to switch into Q&A, but I wanted to leave this slide up for a hot minute because I put up a couple of links. There's a blog specifically for Google Analytics. It's analytics.blogspot.com. And I also, I hope I remember to do this. I was going to make a short URL on my blog. I might have forgotten to do that. But if you start at alexjbconsulting.com, you'll be able to find a couple of blog posts that I put together over time that pertain to using web analytics.
That's great, Alex. Thanks so much. And we are going to put the Q&A off on our resources doc that we'll put together for you. And maybe just in closing, we have Matt here. You get 30 seconds because we're right at time. If there is a key takeaway, a key strategy, some actions that folks can take or key resources moving on from what they've learned in this exploration and wonderful deep dive into Google Analytics, 30 seconds each or less, what would you recommend?
I'm going to say that I would recommend that you start thinking in terms of what does success look like for your website? And as I want to pile on with Alex saying, it's probably not page views. It's what kind of results do you want to get? What kind of actions do you want, measurable actions do you want people to take on your website? Start there.
Thanks, Matt. Alex?
Oh, sorry. Few takeaways. There's a lot of data in there. Invest resources in making sure that your tracking is complete and accurate. That's the one area where I'd say it's really worth outsourcing. Find an analytics expert to just check your setup. because all your conclusions are going to be based on the data you're looking at, and if that's flawed, then you're going to be drawing incorrect conclusions.
Thank you so much. And just a big round of silent hands clapping here. And I apologize we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but we did get to quite a few, and wonderful job from our speakers. So much amazing, rich information. We will, their contact information is here if you want to get a little bit more information or guidance on where to find something. And we do love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so you will see a post-survey, after the webinar. Please let us know what you thought, and we always welcome you to take action on what Matt and Alex just shared in terms of what you can do after the session to further your own goals with Google Analytics. And stay tuned. We have webinars coming up in the series. The next one's going to be on data visualization and infographics. We invite you to visit to learn more. And just a huge thank you to everybody for joining us, a wonderful dialogue. And just a reminder, we will share a link to the recording, a link to the slides, as well as those resources we're going to put together for you. And we wish all of you happy Google Analytics and a great day for the rest of everybody. And thank you to our speakers. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.